Hello, my name's Roger Watson, and I'm the Professor of Nursing at the University of Hull in the United Kingdom. I'm also the Editor-in-Chief of Nurse Education in Practice. And welcome to this session on effective online teaching. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to address your first International Congress on Programme Development and Nursing Education. It's a pity that I can't be with you, but we never know quite what the travel restrictions are going to be at the moment, so considered it best to do this virtually and also to prepare it in advance of the conference. It's a pity I can't be with you at the university. As I say, I've been there many times to visit you in recent years. I sincerely hope that I can come back again in the near future. And I miss not only your town and your university, but Turkey generally. So I'm looking forward to coming back and seeing you before too long. So once again, welcome to this session on effective online teaching, which I hope you find useful. Before I begin, I wanted to say that effective online teaching is not done by accident. It requires some training and some specific input in effective online teaching. And my own love of online teaching began many years ago, long before the pandemic. But of course, during the pandemic, online teaching has become very much more important an issue. But I'm afraid that I think it's been done very quickly and perhaps not always done very effectively. A few years ago, I worked at another university, the University of Sheffield, and that's when I first became familiar with online teaching. I'd never done any before. And we taught a master's in nursing for international students, which was taught completely online. The students made no visits to us and in fact made no contact with us because it was also taught asynchronously. And I'll come to what that means later and what the advantages of that are, and of course what some of the disadvantages are. But in order to undertake that program, everyone who taught on the program had to undergo a specific program on online teaching, which was taught online by a local further education college, and it was called Learning to Teach Online. And I was very glad that I did that program. It lasted nearly a year, and it taught you how to structure online learning and how to deliver it effectively. So I just wanted to emphasize, I think if people are going to be serious about online teaching, they do need to try and seek out some appropriate instruction on the best methods. Now this lecture is only going to be for about half an hour. It's quite short and in some ways actually quite superficial. There's lots of information available online about online teaching and how to do it and what the different modes and models are. I'm going to refer to some documents here, but I'm not going to go into them in much detail. You can find them online very easily and look at them yourself. So thank you very much, and I'm just going to get straight into the session now. So an outline of the session, I'm going to divide this roughly into 4 sections. First of all, I'm going to give a definition of online teaching and look at what it is. Then I'm going to consider models of online teaching. I'm not going to look at this in a great deal of detail. Again, plenty of information is available elsewhere, but what I am going to do is I'm going to compare and contrast the 2 main models or modes of delivery. I'm going to consider very briefly some of the evidence for online teaching and its effectiveness. There isn't a great deal of this in existence, but what I mean by this is that there is some evidence, and there's a really good report that I'm going to refer you to, and you can look at that and you can make your own mind up about it. And finally, I'm going to give you an example, one of my own examples, and I'm going to show you one of the ways in which I deliver that, which I found effective. We'll come to that at the end. So That's the basic structure of the session today. So first of all, a definition of online teaching. Or should I say online learning. Online learning involves courses offered by post-secondary institutions that are 100% virtual, excluding massively open online courses. Online learning or virtual classes offered over the internet is contrasted with traditional courses taken in a brick and mortar school building. So there's a few points there. Online learning is mostly offered beyond school level, although during the pandemic, certainly in my country, we learned a great deal about delivering online learning to schools as well. And they are 100% virtual in the sense that you don't normally make any direct contact with the teachers, although there are what are called hybrid models where part of it can be online too. But the online sections are 100% virtual. And of course, they are now offered over the internet and not usually within a university or a higher education institution building. So you can see immediately that they offer a great deal of flexibility. Now, online learning, before I move on, is nothing particularly new in the sense that there's always been what we call distance learning. And distance learning evolved in Australia, where the distances are vast and people learned, very often school children learned by distance. They couldn't travel to school, so they were taught over the telephone, by television programs, and by material that was sent to them and then sent back for marking and comment. And that model was used in the United Kingdom, and in the 1960s we set up what's called the Open University, and the Open University has existed to deliver degree courses by distance learning long before the internet was invented. So the basic concepts of online learning, which are virtual and distance, are not all that new, but of course online learning offers us a great many advantages, and nearly all distance type learning is done over the internet now. So what online learning should be? In my view, these are the positive points. It should be innovative. There's no point in using this mode of delivery and not doing it innovatively. So compared with the normal classroom learning, where you can do innovative things, but it's limited, you can innovate a great deal in online learning by using different modes of delivery, YouTube, podcasts, ordinary text put up. There's really no limit to the things that you can build in that could be innovative. And innovation is up to the individual who's setting up the program. I don't want to give you a list of innovations as such, but if you feel that you can do it and that it might be useful, you usually can do it online. I'll say right now, though, I would warn against having too many modes of delivery and too many innovations in online learning. As I say, it should be innovative, but it shouldn't be full of innovations, because that can become very confusing and time-consuming for the students. It should be what we call granular. In other words, things should be broken down nicely into small packages that can be taken either as individual modules or individual sessions, and within that sessions lots of different ways, not too many, but different ways of accessing information. So unlike the face-to-face lecture or the session that I'm delivering just now, where someone talks for an hour and then goes away again, Online learning, of course, can contain these elements, and you can certainly do online lectures, but there should be access to other material, and it should be broken down into as small a package as you can possibly make it, so that people can learn small parts and do it in their own time, and then piece it all together under a framework. So granularity is very important in online learning. Should be varied. We shouldn't be using the same methods all the time. It shouldn't just all be lectures. It shouldn't just all be handouts posted up on the internet. It should be varied, and it should keep the students interested, and it should address different learning styles as well. And it should be interactive. Now, even if it's asynchronous, which means not given at the same time, there should still be opportunities for interaction on online learning. So at some point, the tutor or the teacher does need to interact with the students, and certainly in the best models of online learning, and there should be opportunity for the students to interact with each other in discussion groups. And these are, I know that this is something that students find particularly useful. In an earlier slide, I mentioned massive open online courses. These are something that all universities are doing now, making their content freely available in the hope that students will take these programs and then perhaps sign up to other programs. But massive online open learning, which I've been involved in, involves putting programs up, but there's no interaction with tutors, and that's where massive online open courses often fail. But good online learning should have an element of interaction. And of course, it goes without saying that it should be interesting. And if you're doing online learning, then you should try to make it better than traditional models of learning. Try to offer the students something that they might not get otherwise. Difficult to specify how that should be done, but it should be better than traditional models. So again, you can use the full facilities of the internet or the online virtual learning environment platforms that you use at your university to make this an interesting and varied experience, and one that students feel is actually, if not necessarily better, is as good as a traditional model. If it is, I know from experience that students do enjoy it and do appreciate it. Now, I'm not going to go into this in any great detail, but there is material available on online teaching, and this book by Terry Anderson, which is available online actually, The Theory and Practice of Online Learning, is a very, very good resource. And it approaches online learning from the point of view of simple learning models. The way that information from the senses, from sight and sound particularly, get into what's called the sensory store, where we store information very, very, very briefly, then how it gets into the short-term memory, and through rehearsal can be embedded in the long-term memory and brought back to short-term memory, just by rehearsal and by practice. And this is an ordinary model of learning. This applies to any kind of learning. But I think it's important to note that as far as psychologists and cognitive psychologists are concerned, the sensory store is only capable of storing so much information at one time. It's usually 6 to 8 sort of items or facts, and the problem is if you learn another new one, you lose something from the sensory store. So we've got to be take that into account with online learning. And one of the problems with traditional lectures is that students get bombarded. They get hit by far too much information. We can address that with online learning by breaking things down so that they can learn things very easily, one thing at a time. So it may be called online learning, but you can enhance the teaching by making sure that you present things in such a way that they're easily accessible, easy to learn, and don't provide too much information at once. And that addresses that issue of granularity that I was talking about before. And again, from that excellent book, I like the schematic diagram here where he looks at educational media, and the graph along the x-axis looks at the independence of time and distance. So the further along that graph you go, the more independent you can be in both time and distance. And on the left hand, on what's called the y-axis, it deals with the extent to which there's interaction. So obviously at the top left, face-to-face teaching has the maximum interaction. We can't mimic that online, but we have to compensate for that. And over on the right-hand side, we've got down at the bottom, which is very uninteractive, and very independent of time and distance, television and correspondence learning. But further up there, which is more interactive but still independent of time and distance, computer conferencing, and in the middle, other types of learning. And it's the next graph shows, this graph shows how much of this can be encapsulated or subsumed by the web. And really, all that you're missing is the face-to-face interaction. And that's a downside of online teaching, but if it's done well, then we can help to compensate for that. We need to be very aware that face-to-face teaching isn't taking place. We need to be very honest about that with students, and we need to address it and make sure that they're not too disadvantaged by this. Another resource to which I want to point you by Theodore Smith is 51 Competencies for Online Instruction. I'm not going to go into this in any detail or mention them, but this is an excellent book. Again, it's available online. It's an online document. You can find it very easily just typing in 51 Competencies for Online Instruction, and you can either download it, you can also print it. It's quite big, but it gives you the sort of basic things that you need to know to deliver online learning. You don't need to be to know all 51 competencies or necessarily do them all, and it does prioritize them, but it gives you some idea of the sort of area that you're getting into if you haven't done online instruction before. So it compares and contrasts with the traditional modes of delivery, and as I say, it's a great resource, and you can go to it for different kinds of online instruction. As I say, I'll emphasize, not everyone will use all of these competencies, not everyone needs to know them all, but you can find the ones that are most helpful for the kind of online learning that you're trying to deliver. So I'd strongly encourage you to take a look at that document. Right, I'm going to look at the sort of models now, or moving towards looking at the models. And one of the most common models that's used, it's certainly used in my own university and in many universities, although for my own module is done completely online, but that's part of another program which isn't all taught online, so I suppose it fits within what's called blended learning. And according to Wikipedia, where I go for all my definitions, blended learning is an approach to education that combines online educational materials and opportunities for interaction online with traditional place-based classroom methods. So it requires the physical presence of the teacher and the student at some points, with some elements of student control over where they are taught and how they do it and the speed at which they do it. So blended learning is a very common method of learning. There are very few programs these days that don't consider themselves to some extent to be blended learning. But my point about blended learning is that the online aspects of it have got to be as good as for any kind of online program. It's not just a matter of putting up a bunch of handouts and saying that's the blended learning part of the program. That doesn't enhance the students' learning. The blended learning or the online aspects have to be something that complements and enhances the students' experience. So blended learning, this is another excellent document, an epic white paper. It's about blended learning. It's quite a big document by Donald Clark. It looks at what is blended learning, what are the different models, what are the different pitfalls, and so forth. And I just wanted to show you one very popular model, but to show it critically as Donald Clark does here. And you may already be familiar with this model. It's called the Velcro model. Velcro, you'll have it, I'm sure, in Turkey. It may not be called Velcro there, but it's a material with hooks on one set of the material, eyes on the other, and it sticks together. It's used to close clothing and to hold things together and to put notices onto walls, that kind of thing. So the Velcro model is very popular, and people often refer to their model of online teaching or their blended model as the Velcro model. However, Clark is very critical of the Velcro model, and really he says it often involves no more than just sticking two parts of the program together without really thinking how they integrate. So he says there's a tendency to go with gut feeling and slam some classroom training and e-learning together in a primitive manner. It's called the Velcro model. He says, at its worst, this can mean delivering classroom and e-learning that has no cross-references, contradictory content, leaves the learner confused. So he's emphasizing that the integration of components in a blend is important to any blended learning experience. So we must think beyond the simple dichotomy of e-learning and the classroom. We must look, if we're going to do blended learning, to see how to do them together. But I must emphasize that my preferred model for modules in particular is not to use a blended approach, but is to use completely an online approach, even if that's within a program that is blended. So, having considered what online learning should be, I just want to look at some things that it should not be before I progress on to the specific synchronous and asynchronous models and their pluses and minuses. So online learning should not be an online version of the traditional model. That is absolutely the bottom line. You shouldn't just be taking all your traditional material and putting them online, either in the form of online recorded lectures or in the sense of handouts. I'm not saying that handouts can't be there, and I'm not saying that you can't do online recorded lectures, but they shouldn't be the only thing that's available there. And having mentioned handouts, I would strongly recommend people to not have too many handouts on an online program. Sparse material with very useful and interesting hypertexted links is by far the most innovative, interesting way to do it. So it shouldn't just be putting handouts online. It shouldn't just be seen as a repository for the things that you would normally hand out to the students. That is not online learning, although I do know people who think it is because that is what they do, but it's not. And it shouldn't be a plethora. By that I mean hundreds of links to online material. You should be structuring it so that there's a structured use of online material and a limited use of online material. So for example, if you're going to give a YouTube link to some material, try and find the best one that you can find. I mean, it goes without saying that you need to listen to this material yourself and make sure that it's suitable. But don't put up 10 links to the same thing. The student can look for other links if he or she wants to, but you should direct them to one good link. I'll try and show you how I do that in my program towards the end. and it should not be non-interactive. In other words, you don't just put the material up and leave the students to get on with it. There should be an element of interaction either between the students and at various points with you. That can be synchronous if you want it to be, but it's very effective asynchronously by gathering comments together from the group and answering them together. They very often have got common problems and issues with your material. Now, just briefly, have a look at the models before I move on towards the end of the session. We've already considered synchronous. I think we know what that means. It means the learning and the teaching, at least the delivery of the teaching, and the students are there at the same time. So they're sitting, one person's talking into the computer, rather like I'm doing at the moment. Although if this was synchronous, you'd be listening to me in real time. Instead, this is recorded and you're listening to it afterwards, so it's asynchronous. So I think that, and as I say, I think I would move people towards asynchronous because I think it has advantages. So synchronous learning requires people to be there at the same time, and that's one of the biggest problems. It's limited to national or very regional audiences. For international audiences, they have to log in at times which are not convenient. So asynchronous is learning that does not occur in the same place or at the same time. And it uses resources in a way that enhances that experience. And I just put pasted in the heading from an article there, the unproductive debate of synchronous versus asynchronous learning. They both have their place. They can both be used well. One is not necessarily better than the other. They are different, but I would say that asynchronous has got advantages that synchronous doesn't. And one of the biggest advantages for me as a busy academic who travels the world a lot, does a lot of international work, often out of my own time zone, with asynchronous learning, I can leave my program to be delivered when I'm not actually there. So it may have various advantages and disadvantages for students. It's got a great advantage for academics for the delivery. So that's worth considering, because the more convenient it is for the academics delivering it, the more likely they are to learn how to do it properly and to get involved and do it properly. So the advantages of asynchronous learning are, I think, you can produce a much better quality product. I don't know whether you consider this particular presentation to be of good quality, but in terms of better quality, I mean better visuals and better sound. And I took several attempts to make this session. Certainly at the beginning, the first few slides I had to go over several times because I got them wrong. I didn't get my voice right. I wasn't introducing things properly. So I worked on that to get it better. So you can produce a very high quality product asynchronously without the ums and ahs and hesitations that you get with synchronous sessions. And the platforms are much better to use. A platform like this whereby I've made an MP4 file or it's linked to a YouTube or whatever means that it's much better quality than trying to deliver it face to face. I do a lot of synchronous online teaching as it happens, but you're always concerned that there's going to be a problem with the internet link or something going down either at your end or at the other end. And there's very rarely a time in a synchronous session when somebody says, I can't hear you, or I missed that point, could you do that again? So you can produce a much better quality product asynchronously. And you can produce better quality material as well. I've already mentioned it's convenient. It's convenient for students, and it's very convenient for the teachers. And it's got a much wider reach across time zones. In fact, time zones become irrelevant with asynchronous learning. And it gives you the opportunity, as I did at the beginning of the session before you heard it, to do some rehearsal and to get it right. Of course, there are disadvantages, and the disadvantages are that it doesn't suit all learners and it requires some maturity and independence in the learner. So it's definitely not suitable for schools, and I think even in the early stages of programs as undergraduates, it's not so good for them. It's ideal for masters and doctoral students where they're learning independently. So we've got to be aware we can't just put it up for everyone. There's a lack of immediate answers to questions, which is sometimes frustrating for students, but also for the teacher, a lack of immediate feedback to the teacher. So there are some disadvantages, but we have to work hard to overcome these as much as we can. So we've got to recognize it's not for everyone, and in terms of lack of immediate answer and feedback, we have to build in other ways of obtaining that as quickly and as constructively as possible. And discussion groups and being available as a teacher on email or on a WhatsApp group or something like that, anything to enhance the communication can overcome some of these disadvantages. So strategies for asynchronous learning make the material dynamic. In other words, make it lively, not just a load of handouts, written handouts for people to read, a lot of PDFs. Have some interaction. I use in my own teaching podcasts, my own YouTubes, online lectures, and other means of people getting the material. Set clear learning objectives. That's essential for any program, of course, and any mode of learning, but it's absolutely essential that online learners know not only what the overall objectives of their program are, but of exactly what they're expected to learn in each session. Pace the material. Don't give out too much at once. Don't try to put too much in one session and not enough in another. Try to have exactly the same approach to each session with a structure to it so the online learner knows exactly what to expect, how much material they're going to be exposed to, and how long it will take them to do. Create some space for collaboration, and that's best done on virtual learning platforms by having a conference space or a discussion group or something like that. There are other ways, of course, of setting these up, but it's good to have them online on a virtual learning environment so that you can keep a record of them, and of course so that you can keep an eye on them and also make sure that students aren't having problems between each other, for example. That can occur. So you still sometimes need to act as a referee. Provide formative feedback and ad hoc support. So if there's a discussion group, you should go into it, you should respond now and again, not to every single comment, not every single day. Dip into it, make sure the students know you're looking at it, and if you see problems, offer support there. And learn from the feedback and change what doesn't work. Don't change everything every year, but do take a look at the feedback, and if you think it's valid and it can help for the next time you're on the program or the module, implement it. And of course, you have to give students the opportunity to give you feedback. And at the beginning of the semester, very important, check all the URL links, every live link, even if it's to your own YouTubes. They can get broken. They must work for the students. It's just hopeless when they don't, and it can cause a great deal of disruption when they don't. And of course, it goes without saying they can break during the program. Be immediately responsive to that and fix the link, or if it's a piece of material that's disappeared from the internet, find another piece that's good, vet it, read it yourself, look at it yourself, listen to it yourself, and then make a new link available and keep everyone informed. Now, very briefly, the evidence for online teaching. There isn't a great deal of this, some of it's ambiguous, but this excellent report on e-learning for undergraduate health professional education, which was, I think, commissioned by a European body. It may have been from the European Community. Sorry, I don't have the publisher mentioned there. You can find this online very easily. Very detailed, very, very good. It's got a series of papers in it. I've heard some of the authors speaking about the work, and the conclusion they came to was that e-learning wasn't better than traditional learning, but it could be just as good in terms of the extent to which it helped, particularly health students, to learn. So it's a very positive report, and it's very, very useful if you are a serious online teacher. You should get a hold of this report and have a look at it. Finally, in conclusion, online teaching is not an easy option for the teacher or for the learner. It shouldn't be seen as that. It requires a great deal of work. It's very, what I call, front-loaded, and it has to be right. You can't correct as you go along with online teaching. It's got to be right. So you've got to do all the work at the beginning of the program. You can't be writing your lectures as you go through. It's all got to be available at the beginning. Even if it's not all made available at the beginning, it's all got to be online and ready to go, tested and tried, and made sure, for example, all the links are working, that everything is going to be a good experience for the student. So as I say, it's very front-loaded. Once it's up, you can sit back to some extent, dip in and out in the discussion groups, but it's not such hard work until you get to the assessment at the end. So front-loading is the thing. So if you're teaching in the first semester, you do need to have worked on this hard over the summer break or the previous semester before you broke up. And of course, if the program is up or the module's up over several years, it's not such hard work to do, but you do need to go through it all and check it and make sure everything's updated, even the dates of the sessions and when they're expected to be completed. That all has to be moved forward by a year every year. You need to learn some new skills, including things like using YouTube. That's a very handy way to put up material, or other online video platforms. Podcasting is a very useful way to get across material, and blogging is another way. And indeed, on my own online module on quantitative methods for postgraduate students, not only do I use blogging, they learn to blog themselves, and they write a blog as 50% of the assessment. That's the innovation that I use there. I use the online facilities for them to do a particular kind of assessment, and I don't think I've yet had a student in all the years I've taught this module that had ever written a blog before. So in addition to having the quantitative methods aspect, they learn what I call a transferable skill. And you should be willing to share your material. I think there's no point in keeping material to yourself. If you've got YouTubes, make them publicly available. If you're using a podcasting channel, make it publicly available. I don't think we should consider the material to be ours or necessarily to belong to our institution unless there are legal requirements. I think this, if it's online, it should be as widely available to everyone as possible. Other people accessing your YouTubes cannot do the program because they're not registered for the program. They're not there. They're not getting all of the program, but they can make good use of your material and also make suggestions to help you improve it. So I find it very instructive to make my material widely available beyond the university and beyond my own group of students. And absolutely finally, an example. My own program of quantitative methods. This is our virtual learning environment called Canvas. You may use other ones like Blackboard, for example, or Moodle, but they're all very similar. And on it, My session is broken up into different weeks, so it's very granular in that sense. And when you click on any of those weeks, you get a structure within it that tells you exactly what needs to be addressed that week, and it all looks similar every week. Of course, the material is different. So that's that's week one. There's a podcast, there's a Wikipedia link, there's a YouTube link, there's a web link, and so forth. There's a blog link, and there's a discussion group. So that's the sort of pattern that each module takes. So that's all the material there, about 10 links. Sometimes there are fewer links than that. Everything's available online, and when they go to the next week, once they've completed that and done the discussion group, then they'll see a similar structure there with a podcast and perhaps a Wikipedia page of a definition, a YouTube from myself or someone else, and a podcast outlining it. So I think having a common structure is very, very important. Another innovation, it's not a fantastic innovation, this one, but I think it's useful and the students find it useful, is that in the handout, I make the structure of the course clear, and I also each week give the material, the outcomes, the learning outcomes and the aims. I also provide all of the links in the Word document that are available online, so they can be anywhere. They don't necessarily have to log in to the program in order to do it. And I found this a very useful marketing tool for the program, because prospective students can't access the program online. If I send them the current handout, if they're thinking of doing it next year, I can show them how it works, and they can make their mind up as to whether this is something they want to do or not. So I think one innovation is making your material available to the students in more than one way, so that they don't always feel obliged to log in every time into the online system, because that can be cumbersome. The internet can be slow, and or the actual platform can go down. So provide more than one way of accessing the material. So thank you very much. I'm sorry I've taken slightly over half an hour, but that's my email if people want to ask me any questions. You can follow me on Twitter if you'd like to. If you use WeChat, which is a Chinese social media platform, you can follow me down at the bottom right, or you can check my own research and publications on ORCID. Once again, thank you very much for listening, and I thank you very much for the invitation, and I hope you found that useful.